Ever since we saw Richtofen return in the Black Ops Cold War ending cutscene for Forsaken, one thing that a few people were pointing out and began questioning was the cut above his eyebrow. How did Richtofen get that scar? But I guess because it was so small, the point came and then went. But when we saw Richtofen again in Liberty Falls, we also noticed he has a bigger scar along his neck. He also had this scar in Cold War, you can see it on his model, just not in the cutscene. But what this means is something happened to Richtofen before Cold War that we don't know of. Or maybe we do. The only other time that we saw this version of Richtofen was when he was a child in the old storyline. We saw him a couple of times in the Origins trailer, the Revelations trailer, in Alpha Omega and Tag der Toten, and in every instance we saw Richtofen or Eddie as a kid, he didn't have these scars that he has now on his face or his neck. He must have got them as an adult, but because we never hear of anything that would have caused him to get these scars in Cold War between Die Maschine and Forsaken, something must have gone down with Richtofen before then. The other thing you could do just to be sure is check the other models of Richtofen, so the Primus and Ultimus version. Now Primus Richtofen had loads of scars, particularly this one on his cheek which we saw for the first time in Origins, and then the two cuts just above his head as well, which in other maps turned into a, well, more of a rash. But Primus Richtofen has always, in quotation marks, you'll see why later on, had this cut on his cheek, along with a few others scattered around, and so did Ultimus Richtofen, although the cut on his cheek looked slightly different. Either way, every version, again in quotation marks, of Richtofen that we've seen has had cuts on his face. But going back to Eddie that we see in Black Ops 6 or Black Ops Cold War, his cuts are in different places. They're not the same ones that we saw on Primus or Ultimus, which means they're new. And because he didn't have these cuts as a kid, something happened to him as an adult which caused him to get these. And there is only one event that potentially happened with him that may have caused this, and that was an assassination attempt that was put on him by Samantha. And potentially it was this assassination attempt which left Richtofen with these scars on his neck and above his eyebrow. And luckily for us, Samantha actually documented in her diary parts of what went down the day this assassination attempt took place. She wrote, "Diary entry 1. I'm writing it down not because I don't know what happened, but so that others will. My name is Maxis, Samantha Maxis. I know you're reading this, Weaver, and I know you feel the same guilt I do about the boy. I promised I would keep him safe, but we both failed him. The last thing I expected was for you to move as quickly as you did. The operation should never have happened. If I'd have known the steps you would take, I would not have told you the location. The house was supposed to be safe. We both feel the guilt, but I will always blame myself, more than you." And then she continues on in diary entry 9 where she says, "I remember waiting for your call. 10, 11, 12, the phone never rang. Instead, I saw news of the explosion on TV. I couldn't sleep. 3 a.m. I heard a knock at my apartment door. You gave the keyword and I let you in. We'd never met face to face before. It was a shock to finally meet you. You were in a bad way. I did my best to dress your wounds, but it was the first and only time I ever saw you cry. You mumbled something about not knowing, about how sorry you were. You torched the place to cover your tracks after the hit. You said the boy was supposed to be staying with his mother, but he wasn't. He was there, in the house, while it burned to the ground." So Samantha says in her diary that she sent Weaver to the location of a hit, which, if for some reason you don't know, is an assassination target. Weaver was supposed to assassinate someone. As Samantha was waiting for his call, I guess, to say that the mission was complete, she saw an explosion on TV, and then hours later, she got a knock at her apartment door from Weaver where he was in a bad way. She had to dress his wounds, so clearly he had cuts or bruises, he was bleeding. Those cuts either could have been from the explosion, they could have been from him fighting with his assassination target. And then at the end she talks about how Weaver set fire to the house to cover his tracks, but a mother and a boy was in the house at the same time. Weaver didn't know that, so he burned them alive. We now know from the Black Ops 6 cutscene that those two people Weaver burned alive was Richtofen's wife and son. We don't know his wife's name, but his son's name was Samuel. But what could give us a clue as to how Richtofen got his scars is he was Weaver's target. And clearly, since Richtofen's still alive, Weaver failed. he didn't kill him. How he attempted to assassinate him isn't 100% clear, but there is mention in here of an explosion. Samantha was watching that explosion on TV, and from the sounds of it, she knew that was to do with the assassination attempt, so potentially Weaver tried to blow Richtofen up. That could be one way Richtofen got his scars, from an explosion, but just looking at them, they look more like cut wounds to me, almost like he was stabbed in the neck, whereas with something like that, you'd expect more burn wounds. So more than likely Weaver took Richtofen on in more hand-to-hand combat or knife-to-knife combat, stabbed him in the neck, caused this slit above his eyebrow, but ultimately failed to finish him off. Knowing Richtofen's character, he probably fought back, but again, knowing Weaver's character, you would like to think he would be sneaky about it and do it in a way that Richtofen wouldn't even have time to react. But if he was Weaver's assassination target, then clearly he messed up, because Richtofen ended up surviving. And if that wasn't enough to piss Richtofen off, if you failing to kill him wasn't going to cause him to want to get revenge, Weaver then went one step further and accidentally murdered his family. So now you've got a Richtofen that wants revenge for you trying to kill him, and also wants revenge for you killing the ones he loved. And well, that's what we've seen him do in Black Ops Cold War. He got revenge for Weaver attempting to kill him by imprisoning him in Terminus Island. He got revenge for Samantha putting the hit out on him in the first place. And the best part is, he hasn't finished yet. He's only just got started. So more than likely, I believe that's the reason we see these scars on Richtofen in this new timeline, from when Weaver attempted to kill him. But, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we've also seen other versions of Richtofen, such as Primus and Ultimus, which have both had scars on their face as well. And those two aren't as clear. Primus Richtofen, he's had these scars ever since we first saw him in Origins. We still don't know to this day how he got them. They really could be from anything. They could just simply be from him fighting the undead. And these are his battle scars. They could be from a specific event that happened to him, fighting with someone. We don't know. It's never really been questioned, to be honest. I don't think anyone's ever cared. But the one thing that has been questioned a couple of times is the consistency of them, and especially in Blood of the Dead. I don't know if any of you will remember this. You probably will, because it was quite a big kerfuffle. In the Blood of the Dead cutscene, people noticed these scars were no longer on Richtofen's face, leading people to believe that this Richtofen we saw who sacrificed himself was the wrong Richtofen. He wasn't the Richtofen who we thought was here or should have been here. Everybody thought that somewhere along the line, two Richtofens, because we had many of them in the old timeline, must have switched places, because in the map before this, Richtofen had the scars on his face, but then in Blood of the Dead, this same Richtofen didn't have the scars on his face, so between those two maps, they must have switched around, but that was never told to us. It actually turned out that it was Treyarch who messed up here, because if you look at Richtofen's in-game model, which is the exact same version of Richtofen that steps into the mechanism in Blood of the Dead, there is absolutely no chance of two Richtofen switching positions here, because we actually get to play as Richtofen stepping into the device. So you can see the Richtofen you play as, the scars on his face in game, goes into that machine, and then in the cutscene those scars are all of a sudden non-existent, which tells us it was Treyarch who messed up. They simply used the wrong model of Richtofen. I don't even know why they've got multiple, to be fair, because besides from the scars on their face, they look identical. Why they have one version of Richtofen with no scars and then another version with scars, I don't know, because every version of Richtofen should have scars on his face. All Primus versions, all Ultimus versions. But for some reason, Treyarch have two models, and the one they used in the Blood of the Dead cutscene was wrong. So that was simply a mistake from Treyarch, and that wasn't even the first time. In the Blood of the Dead intro cutscene, the exact same thing happens. We see Richtofen with no scars on his face, both versions of him, but even the one we play as has no scars on his face. You then play the game as that Richtofen, and he's got scars on his face, but you then get to the ending cutscene again, he's got no scars. It's just Treyarch messing up the models for the cutscenes. That was what happened there. Funnily enough, if you go to the Blood of the Dead trailer, so not the intro, not the outro, but the cinematic trailer they gave us for that map, Richtofen in that cutscene or trailer actually has the scar on his face. So we've got 3 different trailers or cutscenes with scar inconsistencies. I mean, just for the fun of it, there's another example. The Giant, in the Giant intro cutscene, there's Primus Richtofen, no marks on his face, totally clean, but his in-game model, yeah, he's dirty, he's got the scar, Treyarch messed up. And then The Ultimus version of Richtofen, he has a scar on his face just slightly different. We don't know how he got this. In fact, this wasn't even a Treyarch Zombies team thing from a design point of view of how they wanted Richtofen to look. Remember, Richtofen's character model was just taken from the campaign. This was how Richtofen looked in the World at War campaign. You can see that scar on his face. Treyarch just took this exact same model and turned him into a Zombies character. That was how he started off, so this scar actually comes from before he even existed in Zombies. Treyarch may have implemented a reason as to how he got it in the Zombies storyline later on. We never learnt about that though. We just assume it's from fighting the undead probably. But we saw those same inconsistencies with him. However, there could potentially be an excuse here because every time we've seen Ultimus Richtofen without scars, it's been in a universe that is slightly shifted from the timeline. So for example, in the Zombies Chronicles maps, Richtofen has no scars on his face. Here in Ascension, he's totally clean. This is the Zombies Chronicles version of that map. However, in the original version, this was Richtofen and he had scars on his face. But since the Zombies Chronicles maps are in a different universe to the originals, you could put that down to it being just a different version of Richtofen, a version of him that existed in a universe where the event that caused him to get that scar never happened. The only doubt I have for that theory was the Giant, where in the intro cutscene for that map, Ultimus Richtofen has no scars on his face. Even though we can't play as him in the map we play as Primus Richtofen, there's no way of checking if his actual in-game model looks different and Treyarch just messed up like they did with the others. The Giant also takes place in a fractured universe, so there could be some explanation there as to why he doesn't have his usual scar. I am thinking though, like Primus, Treyarch just used the wrong models. Getting back to the main point of the video though, for Ultimus and Primus Richtofen scars on their faces, we don't have an explanation, we don't know how they got them, but for Eddie, the Richtofen that we have in Black Ops Cold War and Black Ops 6, more than likely, I could be wrong, I think he got these scars from the failed assassination attempt on him by Weaver, put out on him by Samantha. But there could be another explanation. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, drop a like rating. Make sure you are subscribed to stay up to date with the latest content on the channel. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, goodbye.